You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
This is your host, Heidi Marble. I'm so glad you're here to listen to this episode with the dynamic Clay Steeves. He is an adopted person. He is the father of 5, to include a foster child that they have adopted. They are hoping for healing and reunification in that situation. Clay also has a deep faith. He has struggled deeply with reunion and rejection. He also has a lot of hope for adopted people, that we can heal in therapy and in community, and that we can put our armor down and receive the love that we long for. Enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. I am so overjoyed to welcome Clay Steeves to the Pulled by the Root podcast today. Clay reached out to me, and he has an amazing story to tell. I'm going to read you his bio. Clay was adopted when he was an infant, and he went most of his life without knowing who his birth parents were. As an adult, he was reunited with his birth mother and 5 brothers that he never knew existed. Additionally, his wife and him fostered an infant and had the honor to adopt him after a long journey. They now have 4 biological children and 1 adopted son. Welcome, Clay.
Heidi, thank you. And thanks for even reading that. I know that's like my send over bio, but sometimes I just need to be reminded of it. So thank you, because you just live it and you even forget some of the significance sometimes. So thank you.
Yes. Well, thank you for taking the time, Clay. I really think the duality of your life, being adopted and adopting, boy, I really want to sink into that. But before we do that, can you start from the beginning and maybe tell us your story? And we can really get into reunion and rejection. And then let's kind of lead into how that evolved and then your own family.
I would love to. I was adopted at 13 days old. And I like to say that I cannot remember being told that I was adopted. Like, I've just always known. So like, it wasn't like a moment that there was this conversation or like a watershed that my parents sat me down. I've always known. Like, my mom used to say, and I love that she would say this, she would say, "Honey, you came from my heart, not from my tummy." And so like from the very beginning, it was just what I knew. And that was the dynamic. I grew up in that home. I got 1 big sister. She's 6 years older than me. I actually was just on vacation with her and went and saw my mom and dad not that long ago. So I still have an incredible relationship with all of them, and still very thankful that I am in their family and a part of their family. But like I said, I've always known I was adopted, but it was never something I pursued to like find my biological family. It was never something that I felt a huge urge myself. I think once I got married, my wife had questions about it, more so once we started to have kiddos, there was just kind of like the health and medical history dynamic. And I grew up in a world also, I would even just go back and say that there was a lot of families around me that had adoptive kids and adoptees. And so it was pretty I'm not going to say normal, but normalized. In other words, I wasn't the only kid who was adopted. There were 3 kids in my class at school growing up. You're making a face at me like that's not the norm. And
yeah,
so, for me, that was my baseline.
Where do you live? Do you live on some kind of an island that we don't know about?
I live in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I live right in the middle of the country.
Okay, all adoptees, we are not alone. Go to Oklahoma.
That's right. No, and so I think that gave a unique. Maybe just a unique filter for me that I use the word unique. It's interesting because the other way I describe it, was the paradox. And you talked about duality there. So maybe my original duality, and I do think adoption is a paradox, and I think you might agree with that, but was that I would wear it like a badge of honor, but then I'd feel like a black sheep at the same time. And so that was kind of that unique thing. Like first day of class, kindergarten, I'd be like, yeah, this is the one cool thing about me is I'm adopted. And then you'd go home and I'd kind of feel like I didn't even fit in my own house. So it always did have that tension, but I don't know that I ever like chased solving the paradox, so to speak. I just thought it just was. And so that's kind of the dynamic I grew up in. I did not pursue reunification, even once I turned 18, 19 and had like the rights to, and I really just kind of had that I guess that aspect of the story closed for many, many years.
Wow, Clay. So when you decided to go into reunion, that's a huge decision and a life-altering decision. Yeah. And I think a lot of us, well, I can speak for myself, we're not prepared. So can you tell us about that experience? Because finding 5, I mean, whoa, that's the brother lottery right there. What was it like? What was it like for you, Clay?
Yeah. So, and I won't unpack all of it, but a piece of my story is actually I was a college dropout, a college flunk out. I battled substance abuse in college and ended up failing out. And many years later, almost a decade after I'd left school, about 8 years, I really felt prompted. I'm a man of, I like to believe of deep faith. And so I believe in God, and I really felt this conviction that I was supposed to, go back to school, which might seem like a strange thing to connect faith and going back to college after failing out. But for me, it really was this kind of, I'm going to say, tug. I'm going to say this nudge that no, you need to go finish school. And I was like, I don't want to go finish school. I've got kids of my own now. I'm a grown man. I'm earning income. Why do I need to go finish school? And it was like, no, you need to go finish school. And I was like, okay. So I go back and graduate from college as an adult at 29. And that was December 16th of 2011. And the day before, my birth mom had actually written a letter to my adoptive parents. And so there's this whole dynamic of, remember, I was a college flunk out. It was actually really hard on my adoptive parents. And to be honest, when the letter showed up, then I think if that season before hadn't been healed or closed, in other words, me going back and finishing school and graduating and the sequence and the timing there, it would have been hard for them to release because they were actually the ones who got the letter. And my dad, to his credit, has even said, if that hadn't closed, I would have been really tempted to not disrupt your life again because, I'd been, through some volatile seasons, some tough seasons. And so for him to go, okay, I trust you, son. Here's this letter from a lady claiming to be your birth mother. That was kind of the beginning of the process for reunification. And I took that letter and I can proudly say I put it in my nightstand and I avoided it, which is ridiculous, but that was what I did. I was so overwhelmed, and I got so overwhelmed in the moment because it's like you said, no one's prepared. Like we can try, we share, we try to equip, but it is an overwhelming moment. I can at least say for me, it was a very overwhelming moment when that letter came, and I was reading it, and she didn't need anything from me. She wasn't asking anything of me personally, but she just wanted to know who I was and to express her perspective. But I couldn't do it. So I just put it in the nightstand and I avoided it. My wife was going crazy on the inside, but she was very gracious and patient with me and let me go through my process. And I did nothing. I went on like nothing had happened. And it was probably a month later, maybe 5 weeks later, a second letter came. And that was the letter that had a picture of my birth mom's 5 sons. So in other words, my biological brothers. And she, and I can laugh and smile about this now, and they all know the story. But the truth is, I wrestled with I say I avoided it. I don't know that I fully avoided it because you wrestle things, right? So I really did have the thoughts of well, what does she want from me now? Why now? What's different now than then? Does she need money? Does she need something from me? And one of the things, and I'm serious when I say this, Heidi, but it's kind of ridiculous, but it's funny. I really thought does she need a kidney? That was one of the thoughts I had. I know you're laughing and I laugh at it now too, but that really was the thought I had. Does she need a kidney? And that's why she's reaching out to me. What does she need? From her biological son. And then when the letter showed up, I looked at my wife and I was like, well, if she needs a kidney, there's 5 other people who can give it. So maybe I'm a little free now. So we've all laughed now, years and years later, but it really was just a freeing moment for me of she didn't need anything from me. She just wanted to know me. And she just wanted to express her perspective of what she had gone through. And it really was, I'm very thankful for the courage she had, because that's a hard thing. And again, I can only empathize because I've never experienced it as a birth parent, what that must be like. And so for her to have the courage to just try to reach out and just try to have relationship and to be so honoring to my adoptive parents and to me. And it was very overwhelming and wonderful at the exact same time.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Clay. I know a lot of us talk about the ghost kingdom, the fantasy of what what that missing part is in our lives.
Mm.
And so when you got the information and had the reality and had your truth, was that healing for you? Was there a period of turbulence, even though it went well, where your identity is kind of sorting itself out? Because I think it can be very dismantling, even if it's positive, because you're having to change everything you thought about yourself or imagined about yourself. Can you share your experience with that as you're integrating?
Yeah, you use the word turbulent there. And you even said another word. The word I think I would have is it was very disorienting for me.
Because, good one.
It was whatever the narratives were, Ghost Kingdom, I've never heard that. Whatever the narratives were I had in my head, as opposed, as where I came from, or the story that led to where I was, the before pieces, it was all disrupted. And so I was very disoriented on who I was. And uniquely, my biological mom's family and my adoptive family are very different. And I even just mean culturally, meaning like, okay, so let me I grew up in the suburbs of Edmond, Oklahoma. Just that's my family and my dynamic. My parents were very affluent, very modern. And then my biological family, and I love this about them because now I get to live in both families because I've been blessed that way. But they have a wood burning stove in their house and don't have central air. And the first time I was ever with my biological mom, I made some joke about whittling on the back porch, but I was kind of being snarky and sarcastic. And she's like, yeah, that's what your brothers do. And I was like, oh my glory. What, so it was this, and I probably was the only person who had a cell phone, and they had flip phones, and they've all modernized, and but there just was this unique element, like you just described, of it was totally disorienting for me to try to reconcile that, because you're not any of your families, but yet you're a blend and a mashup and your unique self, but yet those have a massive influence on you. And so I think those dynamics in the early part, I'm trying to even think how to experientially talk about it. The first time I ever met my biological mom, Kirsten likes to tell the story, and my wife is Kirsten. We met at a neutral place in St. Louis. We reunified there. That was some of the counseling we had got from folks, is to do it at a neutral location. And we got together, and Heidi, it was probably 8:30, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to go to bed. And I was done. We had been together for an hour, maybe two. And my wife's like, no, we should stay up all night. And I was like, I have to go to bed. I'm so overwhelmed, because it was 29, 30 years had just been jammed into a single moment. And so moments like that were incredibly disorienting, especially once I started to get story of where I came from and learned about my birth father, and kind of all the questions that I may have buried and avoided, you begin to ask. Yeah, it definitely threw me off for, I would say, quite a while. Years. I don't mean minutes. I mean years and years. Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Well, I think it's really helpful for people to relate to each other in that way, because it is disorienting. So before we jump off that subject, there are a lot of adoptees who are in reunions who aren't successful, who are dealing with adopted parents who resist reunion or don't understand it. And adoptees are trapped in this terrible place of all of it. And you have a really great perspective, because not only are you an adoptee, but you've also adopted a child. So you have this really great lens to look through. And I wonder if you could shape the next part of your story, thinking about the people that might be listening. What can you tell us about that, Clay?
Yeah. And I actually, before I even talk about the being an adoptive parent aspect, I would also just share, I've reached out to my biological father and had him say no as an adult. And so I actually have both experiences, even with my parents. And so it was a unique, actually, I've used that word twice now. I don't know that I want to use that. I would say that was another disorienting. That's probably a fair way to say it, experience, because I remember earlier I talked about the nudge or the prompt, and I felt like, oh, I need to go do this. And then that led to this reunification, and it was beautiful. And then we put in years of hard work where we have real relationship now. And my kids, I've got 5 kids, they all they just know I have 2 moms, and they know that family, and we go spend holidays with both families. And, so that's just their norm. That's their baseline. They don't know any different. Well, I got the same urge or prompt again, like reach out to your birth father. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I know how this script goes. Obviously I didn't, but I know how this goes. And I did. And long and short, through intermediaries and then a letter that was kind of, a note sent to somebody else, I basically got back, no, I don't want to know you. And so again, just talking about, I guess I can relate to anybody who's been through either tough reunifications or maybe unhealthy ones or been rejected, who have tried. I actually have been through both. And so it is hard. And it is, if you're not rooted in something beyond maybe yourself or even your family dynamic, I think that really can be devastating. And I can just, from my own experience, talk about it really. I mean, I'm still working through that. I'll just share that piece. Like last month with my counselor, and I'll just encourage anyone, I believe in professional counseling. It has helped me immensely in this journey. Yeah, I was still processing it just last month and how it was playing out in some of my work relationships, that dynamic of me and my birth father, and that rejection as a kid and as an adult. And rejection is a harsh word, so I don't want to use that. Maybe I could use a different word, but that was my experience, was being rejected. And yeah, it does frame for me, now that I have an adoptive son, what does that dynamic look like? And that in my scenario with us, with adopting our foster son, that was a different dynamic because you had two young parents who were battling, again, their own challenges and demons and substance abuse, and the state had stepped in and taken their son from them. And so our heart breaks for them. And we know them and we got to know them previously, but now they're separated and we don't have contact with them. And so it's hard. Like we are hopeful that someday there'll be healing and there'll be reunification for our son with his bio parents. And he actually talked about it just the other night. We were on vacation together and he brought it up and I was like, man, even at 8 years old, like he's just trying to process that. And he thinks about it. And I'm like, man, it is so foundational to who we are that's just a part of the journey. And sometimes it is messy and hard in the brokenness, and sometimes there's beauty in it. And I think you have to learn to find both of those things because they're both there.
Yeah, thank you so much for saying that, Clay. Yeah. I think that, one of the things we want to do with our podcast too is educate people so that they understand what the needs of an adopted person look like. So if you're adopting a child, they are not a blank slate. They come with trauma, and you're acknowledging that in your own situation. And of course, your lived experience that is very difficult because you have, again, the duality. You have acceptance and you have rejection, and that sits in your soul. And I think one of the things I'm hearing too is that this is a lifelong journey of healing. And I love the point that you made about the counseling, because I really do believe a lot of us aren't getting the help that we need from the people we need the help from, that understand the issues surrounding adoption. Can we sink a little bit more into that part, into how you show up? Because what you said that really impacted me when you said it is you have to be rooted in something to kind of take the storm, the hit of these huge influxes of information. And if you're not grounded, you're going to get knocked over. And I can say that from personal experience. I was not prepared psychologically. And, you can't prepare for everything, but at least have a support system to fall back on so you just don't crash to the ground. Yeah. So I don't really know if that was a question, but maybe if you can just reflect back at me some of that, that'd be really great.
No. And I appreciate even the heart of what you're doing. It's a part of why I was excited to come even just chat and spend some time together. Cause I do, I don't want to say too often because there's not judgment in my statement, but our experience has been that the complexities, which I think the complexity, there's that Einstein quote, right? About make things as simple as possible, but not any simpler. Adoption and adoption dynamics are not simple. You used the word trauma earlier. There was a quote. I think it was on Ian Morgan Cron, the Enneagram guy, Ian Cron's podcast, that somebody talked about adoptive families are built on the grave of another family. And I think, which the first time you hear that, and we had some friends that heard it and they were like, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that is messy and that is hard. And wow, that's my experience. And if we're unwilling to do that, meaning acknowledge that, talk about that, be patient and give grace and just create the space for everyone involved, right? We talk about the adoption triad, we talk about the adoptive families, the bio, and just create that space. I've often said, and I don't even know what the question was, so I'm just going to keep going here, Heidi. No. I've often said that one of the keys in all of these things is you got to talk about elephants, and it's fun for me because when I was a little kid, when my parents would ask, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" my answer used to be a big daddy elephant with tusks. Like that was my answers, that I want to be an elephant. And ironically, one of the greatest gifts in reunification that worked was we always talked about elephants, and that was a phrase my birth mom and I had together. And I was like, "Oh, that's funny because I'm the elephant." And I'm okay being the elephant because I am the elephant in the room when I would show up and meet my biological family. And you have to be willing to just talk about elephants. And so if you have a friend who is an adoptee, or if you, and the truth of the matter is, and if there's any adoptees listening, I just want to encourage us, like we have to be willing to recognize the elephants, because oftentimes, and I went through this a long time when I talked earlier about avoiding, we just act like, oh no, there's nothing there. Like, it's fine. I don't need to know any of my story. I don't need to know any of that. And I think the truth is that's just my experience. I don't want to say this, but my experience is that's a protective mechanism. And so I think the counseling aspect, what it does is it creates safe space, and you have real relationships with people. Like my wife was this for me, where no matter the train wreck or the mess, she wasn't going to go anywhere. She was going to pick me. She loved me. And she was like, yeah, if it works, whether he rejects you and they choose you, whether they, you win, you lose, it doesn't make a difference. I'm going to pick you. That was you talked about the roots and even thinking about your logo. Like it was grounded. Now for us, and I'll just share for me, that's also because of our faith, our belief in God and Jesus. And that has played a foundational piece for us in what we believe about who we are and what we were chosen to do. And so I think that allowed us to stay grounded, that whether the story was beautiful and we had beauty, or whether it was a grave and ashes, either way, we were just called to walk through it. And so with our son, which is, oh man, everyone talks about in fostering. Sorry, I just got emotional, Heidi. Everyone talks about in fostering. Everyone talks about in fostering. The hard part is when the kiddos go back. And it is hard if you stand in the gap, right? Adoption's hard, fostering's hard, all these elements, they are crazy hard. And I'll be real direct. It's often caused me to, it's challenged my perspective of God. Because if I claim to be a man of faith, I claim to follow Jesus. And then it talks about in the Bible, the purest form of religion is caring for orphans and widows. And I'm going to tell you, caring for children in need is, I don't know that I have the English language to talk about the challenge of it. Because our son has crazy neurological and health challenges that he didn't pick any of them, because you're talking about he was exposed to tons of drugs in the womb, and he's got behavioral challenges, and he's got tons of things that are out of his control, but yet affect him and our family. And I'm like, and that's the purest form of that is, then that makes me challenges my paradigm of what following God is and who he is, thus who I am, all these elements. And so I'm giving the raw, and all of that to say, you've got to have safe spots. And I think a professional counselor, I think maybe people who have either walked the road before and can just look at you and go, yeah, okay, I know that look. I know that look. All right. You know what? You're not alone, which is what I know is a part of your passion, just to say to people, you're not alone. Like you aren't the only person who's going through this, just to have somebody who can look at you and go, yeah, I get it. And it's not even always to have an answer, but it's just to go, yeah, I get it. And it's okay to process that way. I think that's critical in any of these, in the adoption triad and adoption restoration and all of it. Yeah.
Clay, that was so well said. The safe spots, the elephant. I love that. I think I would probably be a woolly mammoth.
Nothing wrong with that. You got big tusks in. That's cool. I love it. That's right.
All the bigs. Yeah, I've got the hair going, so it could work.
I love it.
No, I think, adoption is usually grounded in secrecy. And you were speaking about those protective mechanisms that we put in place. It's like the armor. And when you're young, you don't even really realize you're doing it. It's almost like an instinct that you know something's off. You don't want to be rejected again. So you become a chameleon. I hear that over and over again. And when you're able to acknowledge that, that is a really big deal. And I think that's what you're speaking about as far as the elephant being the adoption issue or the fostering issue, all of those things. Thank you so much for your perspective on that. So Clay, as we begin to formulate the end of this interview, I hear you saying that you're coping with connection and rootedness and having a really great marriage and a deep faith. And you also have a good relationship with one part of your bio family. So, and I'm sure that all took a lot of really, really hard work, but a lot of adoptees struggle in relationship and trust and marriages and things like that. What encouragement can you give? Because part of faith is trusting. And I do like the God I want to believe in, he's okay with my questions and he's okay with my anger, right? So I feel like I want a 1-800 number. Hey, God, not cool. This is not cool. Not happy right now. So all of that being said, what do you tell those people that are in despair?
Man,
I know it's tough. Maybe even what hope you have for them.
I think one of the things that so we own a small business. I just want to talk about one thing. We own an orthopedic device sales business, and it's actually called Habakkuk, which is named after an Old Testament prophet. And one of the cool things about Habakkuk that I love, is his name means to embrace and wrestle. So side note, in Hebrew. And so when you talk about embracing and healing, and the other cool thing about Habakkuk, and I think you'll appreciate this, is he's actually the only prophet who takes a message from the people to God, as opposed to God giving a message to a prophet to give to the people. And so this idea of embracing and wrestling and being willing in relationship to communicate how you really feel, to trust the person with your hurt, with, by the way, maybe my irrational pain or hurt or my inability to communicate what I really feel, but to trust them enough to just give them what I got, to be courageously authentic in my own mess. I just think that's critical in any relationship, in a marriage, in a friendship, is just that willingness to do that. And I can understand, and I'm going to try to tie it back to the leadership thing I've been learning, is that we really, most of us, and so much for me, I can speak about, there were a lot of approaches to life that I had that served me really well for a long time. Right. And that can be in leadership. It can be in relationships. You talked about it with Armor, and I love Brene Brown's stuff on that. We can go back to it. The Armor, it actually served us well. And so we should never vilify maybe those things about our approach when we were younger. But what we should do is have the willingness to become reflective, to go, is it still serving me in the same way it was then? Or is it now my default approach? And if it is, what are the liabilities that it produces for me in addition to the benefit? Because I am still getting a benefit by protecting myself, but what's the liability? Because now maybe I'm getting cut off in a relationship. Maybe I can't love as well as I could, or maybe actually even need to, as a human being who's made for connection with other people. Or maybe what are the relationships and the beauty that could be in front of me that I'm unwilling to expose myself to because of the fact that I've been hurt previously. And so now my coping mechanism, my defense mechanisms are preventing me. So it might just be the courage just to become reflective. And I just want to say again, my journey counseling really helped me with that. Again, creating safe space to become reflective about myself, talking to people who've gone on the road in front of me, to just say, man, is it still serving me? And that way it's not negative, because in the past it really was helpful and functional. It might have been needed for us as adoptees to get through the seasons we went through, I should say. But is it still helping in the same way? And if it is, what are the liabilities it's producing to where maybe I'm being held back from maybe something greater, maybe some beauty out of the grave. Because if it was built on a grave, what if there is beauty to be had? What if there is beauty to be had? Yeah.
Oh, Clay. Oh my goodness. This is so important. Everyone listening, listen again and listen again, because the struggle is real with this. The being vulnerable, because at our most vulnerable, we had the most severe injury, and it is instinctive to put up the armor, but that armor also can become a barrier toward the connection we need. And it's so difficult. And I love the idea. You've been talking about wrestling a lot. And my son was in jujitsu.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is taking it to another level. So I almost feel like for some people, it is jujitsu with our emotional lives. So we're just twisting and torquing and, trying to get control of this thing. And you've given so many great ways to try to do that, to get our moves where we can actually get the upper hand on our emotional lives, because I think all of us, as you said, are built for connection. And just because you're adopted doesn't mean you can't have it. You're living proof of that. And I think maybe that's the encouragement, is that you think you can't, but you can.
It's good.
Yeah. Oh, Clay. Oh my goodness. Well, is there anything else you would like to talk about before we sign off?
No, I just want to say thanks, because I think it's a special thing to have the courage to go into this space and talk about this in a way. And the phrase I love, and this isn't my phrase, I love to use it, is it really does take a courageous authenticity. Because, there's no courage without fear. There's no courage without danger. And so we have to be willing to step into risk, right? That's what we're talking about here. Do I risk being vulnerable? Do I risk putting myself out? And I think in this space, we want to, I don't say we, I think often society and many in the realm want to just talk about the good parts. And I think when we talk about both, because when we talk about the duality, I'm going to use your word now. I love that, but I'll give you credit. I promise. So do we talk about the duality of it? I do think that beauty for ashes, that paradox of being chosen and rejected, of a badge of honor and a black sheep, like the willingness to go into those spaces, I think really matters. And so I just want to say thanks to you for creating a space for people to come have that conversation, and to look for both things in this space, and to be able, talk about the hard facts and then look for the beauty as well.
Well, you just really prompted a thought in me, Clay. These spaces that we create for each other, the willingness to show up today and talk about real things, that is vulnerability. So being able to share our stories is maybe a first step toward taking off that armor and being seen and having some healing take place. It doesn't mean that there might not be a negative comment or something that comes, but at least you can rebound it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
If you have the strength of being heard and seen and known and loved.
Yes. That's beautiful, because because you risk again or put yourself out doesn't mean there won't be another wound. Doesn't mean there won't be hurt again. Like we have to be, that's the risk, but we have to ask ourselves, what's the return? What's the beauty? What's the love, the connection that we can put ourselves out and gain, which is so much worth more, right? Which will help us to know who we really are, which will help the roots to go deeper. All the things we've talked about that will allow us to be able to sustain more wins, more challenges, more external things, give us and I can't think of the serenity prayer, but give us the courage to not control the things that we can't control. Like, just let go of those things. We cannot do it. So just let it go. I do think that is beautiful, even the way you just summarized that there. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you, Clay. Well, I'm going to go try to have a woolly mammoth day.
Yes. Let's go talk about the woolly mammoths. I love that. That's even more eloquent than elephants. That's so good.
I feel like stampeding across the yard. Everything's going to be okay. Oh, Clay, this has been such an extraordinary time with you. Thank you so much for the gift of your voice and your heart. I know this interview is going to help many. From my heart to yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heidi.